What's up, you guys? I'm super sweaty, but that's because today we are breaking down a simple freestyle concept that you can utilize to provide yourself with a bit more direction and a bit more structure for your freestyle rounds. The goal with this concept is to provide a new perspective on the concepts, the foundation, and the vocab steps that we already know within hip-hop dance in order to amplify the creative choices that we make while we're freestyling. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let's just hop into the breakdown. Before we get started with this video, I just wanted to let you guys know that we're trying out a bit of a new format with this one. For the most part, this video is uncut. I really want it to feel like you guys are actually in the room with me as I'm teaching and breaking down these ideas. I want this video to have a bit more of an organic feel. This is sort of the prototype for this concept. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be exploring it a little bit more, and so I would love to know your guys' thoughts on it down below in the comments. With all that being said, let's just go ahead and hop into the video. So we're going to be breaking down this concept into 4 separate sections. All 4 of these sections you can kind of think of as sort of prompts for your freestyle and sort of just different ideas or different ways that you can play with or manipulate your movement. These are meant to be more so like inspirations or ideas that you can utilize in the moment that will help you to pull from or to recall the knowledge that you already have about hip-hop dance. My goal with this concept is to help us to be able to more quickly pull from our own personal bag and pull from the knowledge that we already have about hip-hop dance. So rather than thinking about this concept as like a new idea or like a new step or something more like that, I want to think instead about this concept sort of working as a new way to look at the movements that we already have in our bag, if that makes any sense. This first section is going to work sort of as a base for all of the other sections, but I don't want you guys to think that you always have to utilize this concept in this exact progression that we're going to be breaking everything down today. Like, you don't always have to follow this same order for everything. This is more so just how we're breaking it down today. I'm hoping that it'll help you guys to kind of start to look at your movement or the concepts that you play around with while you freestyle in a little bit of a different way. I really want to encourage you guys to just have patience with the movement ideas that we're breaking down today. Don't feel like you have to rush into everything, or just try to kind of pull back a little bit and don't focus on this idea of making things look complicated. Just focus on this idea of tapping into your body and into your responses while you're freestyling. Try to tap into something a little bit deeper. We're trying to build that mind-body connection within our freestyle so that we can shorten the time between when we have an idea to do something and our body's response to that thought. So we want to, in theory and ideally, diminish that space to be instant. We can think of something, or at least think about something beforehand that we want to do, and then execute that thing, if that makes sense. So to kind of break down this first section, we're going to be thinking about sort of starting our exploration with just some basic hip-hop fundamentals. So we're going to be utilizing this concept of bounce, okay? This is sort of going to work as the foundational layer or structure for the rest of our round. Everything that we do from here is sort of going to be built off of this first layer. So we sort of establish our bounce as kind of a first building block, or just a first idea to give us some direction to play around with. So we have our bounce: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now obviously with your bounce, there's so many different ways that you can play around with just that. You can play around with like the way that you bounce. You can play around with the level or the texture of your bounce. You can play around with the effort that you're putting in, or even the timing. We're going to get a little bit more into timing a little bit later in this video, but even just thinking about your bounce and all of the different ways that you can play around with it. This is our first layer. We're gonna get into some more ways that we can play around with it a little bit later, but for now, we just wanna think about our bounce working as sort of our base layer for our exploration. So that's our first layer. Our second layer is going to be our rock. Bounce and rock, yeah? Bounce and rock, the two most fundamental and important components of hip hop dance. So in addition to exploring our bounce and just sort of starting with this, we can start to incorporate our upper body. Start to play around with utilizing our torso. We can rock side to side. We can rock front to back. So many different ways that we can play around with that. This is sort of a new dimension that we start to add to our movement. Instead of just going up and down with our bounce, we can start to play around with taking things to more horizontal angles, if that makes sense. Starting to play around with the horizontal plane versus just the vertical plane, yeah? So thinking about all the different ways that you can play around with your rock as you are bouncing, all the different combinations, the different tempo, and just the new dimension that adds to your dance. Sort of thinking about these first two layers as like the body of our movement. This is the center of everything that we're gonna do. From there, we can start to play around with changing or manipulating our foot placement, yeah? So changing our foot placement simply just means to change where our feet are placed on the floor underneath us. So we start with this sort of central foundational idea of our bounce and our rock. From there, we can start to play around with moving our feet a bit, which maybe takes us around the room, or maybe it just changes the shape that we're making with our body a little bit, you know, sort of changing where our feet are being placed. Now, there's so much creativity when it comes to your feet. You can play around with vocabulary steps. You can play around with different patterns and different concepts. If you understand the compass concept or the 9-square concept, just playing around with all the different ways that you can utilize and incorporate your feet as you are also playing around with your bounce and your rock, right? Now, the cool thing about approaching our freestyle in this way is that we're sort of starting with the two most important elements of hip-hop dance, meaning that we're basing our exploration in the foundation of hip-hop versus just basing it in whatever comes to our head in the moment, if that makes sense. Not just basing it off of our own movement, but basing it off of a foundational concept, basing it off of a foundational movement idea that is central to the style of hip-hop dance. So as we do that, it sort of changes the way that we explore, and it becomes a little bit less about me having to always make up a new movement while I'm freestyling versus being able to tap into movement concepts, ideas, and vocabulary that already exist within hip-hop dance that I can utilize in my own freestyle and in my own way. So that's kind of the cool thing about approaching our freestyle like this. Now, when it comes to our feet, we can play around with putting our feet in different places on the floor, just stepping, playing around with different vocabulary ideas, playing around with crawls, kick step rocks, all that sort of stuff. We can also play around with picking our feet up, putting them back down, opening them to the side. Like, you can make a choice. Do I want my foot to come up, or do I want to keep it on the floor as I'm bouncing? Another idea to kind of keep in mind as we're exploring all of these concepts is that we don't need to think about establishing one concept and then maintaining it exactly the same the whole time. So even though we're starting with our bounce and then we're adding in our rock, that doesn't mean that we have to keep that exploration going exactly the same the whole time. We want to think more so about starting with our bounce, keeping it in place, but not necessarily like feeling like we have to bounce the same exact way the whole time that we're dancing. It's more so meant to work as like a starting point, and then from there, we sort of evolve our exploration. It sort of becomes something a little bit different. It's still there, and we can still always revert back to our bounce and utilize it, but we're not necessarily maintaining it for the entirety of our round, if that makes sense. So we have our first 3 layers. We have our bounce, we have our rock, and we have this idea of playing with our foot placement. And there's no rules to that. Any way that you know how to play around with your foot placement or to play around with your feet, you can use hooks, you can skate, you can step, you can kick, step, rock. Utilize any ideas that you know for playing around with your feet in this exercise, starting with your bounce and then incorporating the feet and the rock with the upper body. Thinking also about the relationship of the upper body when you're rocking with your feet and with your bounce. Like maybe you isolate the rock in the upper body and the feet at different times. We're gonna get a little bit more into that later in this video. And then the last little layer that we're going to add that is going to work as sort of the base or the body or the movement for the rest of this video is to think about utilizing or incorporating our arms. Yeah? So thinking about our arms as sort of their own separate thing, we can utilize gestures. Basically, when I say gestures, I just mean talking or communicating with your hands, utilizing your hands to communicate something without saying words. You know, like when you watch hip hop, music videos, or performances, artists on stage, a lot of times they'll utilize their hands. They'll be playing to the camera or to the crowd. Hip hop, dance, or just hip hop culture in general, there's a lot of talking or communicating with the hands. Hands are utilized a lot to make or to emphasize a point. And so I like to utilize gestures as I'm freestyling because it feels very true to the style in my mind. It's also just very helpful and gives me something to do with my arms. Another idea that we can play around with our hands is hand placement, just different placements of the hand on different parts of the body. We can put a hand on the knee, put a hand on the shoulder, hands on the head. We can utilize the hands just in different ways, creating different points of connection as we're freestyling to help sort of change the shape or change the intention of the movements that we're playing around with. So that is the fourth and final layer, thinking about utilizing and incorporating our hands into this little layer cake that we're building of our freestyle. We start with our bounce as the first layer, our rock as the second layer, our feet as the third layer, and then our arms as the fourth layer. And you can see that when you sort of start with one layer and then you add the other layers, it sort of helps you to isolate your movement a little bit better in your head, as opposed to thinking about always having to do everything all at once, which can just feel overwhelming. It is a way to sort of delineate and to make more deliberate decisions, to sort of peel back the layers and to be like, okay, I can just start with my bounce. And then naturally from there, you're going to feel like, oh, maybe I can start to incorporate my upper body a little bit. And then maybe from there, you feel something a little bit different, like, man, I want to start like utilizing my feet. Maybe my bounce sort of takes on a little bit of a different tone, or I'm utilizing it a little bit differently, but I utilized it to get me started, and now I'm moving in a direction, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like this idea of starting with raw materials versus starting with a blank slate, if that makes any sense. It would be a lot harder to build a house if you had to go out and harvest all of the materials, chop down all the trees, and cut all the logs and finish them before you even started building the house. If you started building a house with a giant pile of lumber that would complete the entire project, that would be a lot easier because you could just start working with the materials versus having to like go out and search for them and maybe not even be able to find all of them right in that moment. So that's kind of the idea that we're playing around with. and more the methodology that we're utilizing for this concept. So there's obviously lots of different ways that you can play around with your movement, but we're sort of thinking about, for this video, just isolating our movement and our body into those 4 different components. We're going to play around with a lot of different ways that we can utilize those components later in this video, but this sort of layer cake of movements that we've constructed is going to primarily work as the base for all of the other exploration that we're going to do throughout the rest of this video. We have our bounce as the first layer, we have our rock as the second layer, we have our foot placement as the third layer, and then our arms as the 4th layer, yeah? Now, any creativity or any decisions that you want to make, any different ways that you want to play around with those different parts of the body is completely up to you. And I'm not even saying that you always have to work in that exact order. You don't have to start with the bounce, move into the rock, then do the feet, then do the arms, right? It's more so just to help you to isolate all 4 of those components or all 4 of those parts of your body in your mind, so that you can make more deliberate and informed choices with your freestyle, if that makes sense. So before we move on to the next section of this concept, we're just going to take some time to explore these 4 components, this sort of base that we're going to be utilizing throughout the rest of this video with some music by itself. So just sort of thinking about isolating and utilizing our bounce, our rock, our foot placement, and our arms, just in whatever way we wish to. The idea here is not necessarily for you to explore exactly like I am, but it's more so meant to be a prompt for you to specifically explore what you know about these 4 components. What do you know about bounce? How do you like to play around with your bounce? How do you utilize your rock while you're dancing? How do you like to play around with your feet? What footwork concepts or steps do you most commonly utilize when you're freestyling? And then how do you stylize with your arms, right? This is sort of like the body of our hip hop movement. Like when we're talking about hip hop dance, this is kind of like what it is. We have bounce, rock, and then we are basically just changing where our feet are and our arms go as we feel led by the music. And so try to get lost in it, try to get lost in your exploration. You can utilize 1 layer or 2 layers together. You don't have to utilize all 4. I really also encourage this idea of just practicing slowly and maybe practicing with a little bit less effort than you normally would. I don't think that always dancing super big and super full out is the best, because sometimes that just makes us like kind of snowplow through everything without actually thinking critically and developing control over our movements. So even if you have to pull it back a little bit and be a little bit more chill and a little bit more controlled, if that means that it'll help you to more accurately reflect what the music is saying, then I would rather that than just going super big and full out for the sake of going super big and full out, but not really thinking about what you're doing, right? What we're trying to do with this exercise is we're trying to cultivate more mindfulness in our freestyle. So we're going to turn on some music. We're going to take some time to just explore with those layers, and then we're going to move on to the next section of this concept. for this next section of the concept, we're going to be playing around with our levels and our placement in the room. We're kind of going to be giving you some specific prompts that will help you to look at all of the different ways that you can utilize simple things like where your body is facing, where you're standing in the room, the level that you're holding your body while you're freestyling to add even more creativity to your movement. So basically, we are beginning with this sort of base, playing around with those 4 basic elements of our bounce, our rock, our foot placement, and incorporating our arms, right? So we start with that body, and then from there, we're going to think about adding in another layer or another prompt. Start with this, and then think about changing or manipulating your levels. So you don't always have to maintain the same level while you're dancing. You can choose to stay up as you freestyle. You could choose to go down low and keep everything super close to the ground. You can maintain like a mid-level, 5, 6, 7, 8. But the idea is to not become stagnant in your level, right? It's to be dynamic in the choices that you're making. You could decide to go down to the floor with your movement, or you could decide to keep everything a certain level, or even just change the level that you're exploring with from time to time as you're dancing. I think that levels is one of the most underrated ways that you can just change or add more style or dynamic to your movement, right? Like hip-hop movement is really just bounce, rock, and groove. And we have obviously other components within that, but basically we have the main body of hip-hop movement, and one of the ways that we can most effectively play around with it is to simply think about just changing our level. Think about utilizing high, medium, low levels. You can just start with those 3 basic ones that everybody knows. Think about dancing up high, dancing up here, 5, 6, 7, 8. Think about dancing on more of a medium level. Boom, da, 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 da. Or taking it to the floor. Boom, ha, boom, ha, boom, ha. Really, if you just take some super simple and basic ideas, there's a lot more to dive into than I think sometimes we really give credit for. We think that just because it's simple, it's not going to yield an interesting result. When in reality, I feel that it's the basic stuff that the deeper we dive into, the more interesting results they will yield. So that is a simple prompt to think about playing around with when it comes to your movement. Simply changing your levels as you dance, right? Boom, ha, changing the different planes that your body is operating on. So that's one simple prompt for this section. Another prompt is to think about this concept of changing your body's facing in the room that you're dancing. So what I mean by changing your body's facing is basically just to think about your front half, meaning like your chest, your face, whatever, changing the direction that your body is facing in the room while you're dancing. Thinking about taking your movement and making it a little bit more 360 degrees versus just being locked off to one direction, right? Sometimes I think it's as simple as that, just reminding ourselves, oh, there's an entire room to dance to. I don't have to just face one direction the whole time. I can change and manipulate just the direction that I'm facing while I move. And that can lead to more dynamic in your movement and more creativity in your choices, right? Even if you're just keeping it chill, boom, boom, it can add so much dynamic to your movement. You can think about different body parts facing different directions. Like maybe my hips twist to face the right, but my upper body stays to the front. Boom, up, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2. It's a simple way to add a little bit more style to your exploration, a little bit more dynamic. It's a way to not keep yourself locked off to one specific direction. Now that is the second prompt for this concept, for this section of the concept. And then the third prompt for this little section is this idea of our placement in the room that we're dancing in, right? So far, hypothetically, you could have done everything that we just did staying in one spot in the room. You could change your foot placement, you could keep your body facing different directions, playing around with just those basic movement concepts. All of that could be done in one spot in the room. Not necessarily saying that you are doing that, but adding in this third prompt of specifically exploring, changing your placement in the room as you dance. Boom, ha, boom, ha. Utilizing and eating up the full floor versus just getting isolated to one specific zone or one specific spot, right? Really utilizing the whole floor and the whole space. It just helps to, I don't know, it sort of helps me to just, it like fuels me to be like, oh, there's so much more to explore, like so much more space. I can take this around here, like feeling like I can eat up the entire room helps me to not feel as limited. And it's not even necessarily that I don't feel like I can do that, but it's just the reminder or the prompt of keeping it in my head that helps me to feel like, oh, I have a whole world of exploration that's open up to me now. So that is a simple final prompt for this second section that you can utilize to add a little bit more dynamic or play around with just your main body of movement, right? You got your bounce, your rock, your foot placement, different ideas with your arms. One way that you can change it and play around with it is to simply just change where you're standing in the room. Change which direction your body is facing while you dance. To change the levels that you are operating in as you move. Keeping these ideas in mind will help you to cover and to utilize the full space that you're dancing in and to not neglect anything, if that sort of makes sense. So think about utilizing those three ideas, your levels, your body facing, and your placement in the room for this next little round of exploration. You're still utilizing that main body of movement, your little foundational component, along with any of the other ideas that you know and that you feel comfortable with. Just basically your freestyle. Taking your freestyle and specifically now thinking about utilizing those prompts of your levels, your body facing, and your placement in the room. Let's turn on some music and just explore that for a moment. third little section, I'm gonna kind of keep my computer near me so that I can remember all of the different little prompts that I have written out. But for this third section, we're sort of thinking about playing around with this idea of our timing or our musicality. Now, obviously, the movement that we've been doing thus far has been musical, and you've probably played around with some timing variations within it, and that's good. We're sort of just thinking about this as the next layer or the next prompt that we're going to be exploring within our movement. It's not to say that you haven't been playing around with your timing or your musicality already, but maybe there's some new ideas in here that you've never utilized before, or maybe these ideas will just help you to think more intentionally about the way that you're utilizing your timing, if that makes sense. So, the first prompt that we're sort of going to be working with is this idea of changing the focus of our movement after a specified amount of time. So basically what I mean by that is rather than thinking about doing everything or just freestyling blindly for the entirety of your round, think about changing or shifting the intention or the prompt or the concept that you're playing around with every blank amount of time. It could be every 2 8 counts, it could be every 4 8 counts, it could be every 8 count. Sort of thinking about keeping it dynamic and keeping it interesting. I do think that there is value in practicing slowly and really taking the time to let an idea come to fruition in your body, not feeling like you have to constantly be doing something just for no reason. But I also think that it is equally valuable to think about just changing the intention or the idea that you're playing around with in your movement every couple of counts. And you can even set aside a specified amount of time. You could set aside, okay, I'm going to play around with this catch and throw concept with my hands for 2 8 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then after that, I'm going to morph it into something different. I'm going to play around with some more waving textures. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then maybe that takes you into something different. But basically the idea is to think about applying new concepts, new movement ideas, or just utilizing different steps every blank amount of time. It's to set a specific amount of time that you're going to play around with one concept and to then think about challenging yourself to switch it up after that period of time is over. So maybe you play around with one concept for 2 8 counts. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I feel like this concept sort of also helps us to develop this idea of our storytelling while we're dancing, right? It helps to kind of provide us with more of a progression in the narrative of our dancing, right? I think sometimes we think about our freestyle as just purely movement, which it is, but sometimes I think it's helpful to think about things existing on a timeline. You have a start and a narrative that you are creating with your freestyle. And whether it's just watching yourself play around with a catch and throw concept for 2 8 counts and then progressing that into something else, watching a progression from one idea into another is a very interesting thing to see. And it's also a good creative exercise to think about taking one concept and then progressing that into another concept as you're freestyling. So that's the first little prompt for this idea, to think about starting with one concept, utilizing it or exploring it for a certain amount of time, whether that's 2 8 counts, 4 8 counts, 1 8 count, and then from there progressing into a new idea. So that's the first little prompt for this section. And then the second little prompt that we're going to be playing around with is to isolate different components of the music within our freestyle. So basically, I have another video on my channel kind of talking about this idea, but within music, there are different components that we can dance to, and there's different parts of the song. So we have parts like the beat, we have the melody, and we have the vocals. Even if we just start with those 3 components, that's a lot of separation and isolation for us to practice ascribing or matching our movement to while we're dancing. So as opposed to thinking about dancing to the whole song the whole time, we can isolate our exploration or our movement to specific components within the music just to add another layer of creativity. So we could start by playing around with just the beat, just the drums, the boom, boom, ka, 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 boom, boom, ka. You know, we could just start with that. And then from there, we could move into playing around with the melody. How would that change how we're exploring with our freestyle, right? We may not explore the drums the same way that we explore the melody, right? Our goal is to bring the music to life, to make our dancing create the shape or the feeling or the image of the music. And so we want to more accurately represent the music depending on which component we're playing around with. So if we're playing around with the beat, maybe it's a little bit more hardcore and we're hitting those accents. Then if it's the melody, maybe we start to play around with a little bit of a different tone in our exploration. Yeah? Maybe it's a little bit softer. Maybe our movement is a little bit more elongated. Different textures. And then we also can think of playing around with the vocals. Maybe this is a little bit more performative, utilizing more gestures, less like big, crazy, like super full out movement. Maybe it has a little bit more of a narrative to it. Maybe we're utilizing more our humanness as we explore this. I like to utilize this concept of gestures. A lot of times when I'm freestyling, I like to think about my hands sort of adding in the humanity to my freestyle so that it's not just moves. I also have the personness or the pedestrian aspect when I'm just utilizing my hands to talk or to add style to my movement, if that makes sense. So thinking about isolating those 3 components as we explore. Simply isolating the beat as we freestyle. 5, 6, 7, 8. Maybe moving into the melody. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then from there playing around with the vocals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can do that same as we did for the last prompt, switching after a specified amount of time, or you could spend an entire round just focusing on highlighting the beat with your movement or highlighting the vocals. Really, it's just same as all of the rest of these, a prompt to help you to think more critically about what part of the music you are trying to highlight with your movement, if that makes sense. Being more critical and being more deliberate about the choices that you're making so that it doesn't just feel like I'm dancing to everything all at once. You know what I mean? If you become a little bit more isolated and a little bit more specific about those choices, then it'll help you to more accurately reflect what's going on in the music. And then for our next little prompt, let me get my computer here, we're going to be thinking about dancing on specific counts and only dancing on those counts. So basically what I mean by that is as instead of moving the whole time, utilizing every count of the 8 count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Instead of doing that, thinking about only allowing your body, boom, boom, to move on specific counts of the 8 count. So the reason for this is that if we maintain like continuous motion the whole time that we're freestyling, even if we're doing super cool stuff, it's eventually going to get somewhat flat. And so being able to play around with when we're moving versus when we're not moving will add a layer of surprise or a layer of change that keeps our freestyle a little bit more interesting. And it also takes some of the pressure off of us a little bit because we don't have to be moving all the time. Like it doesn't have to be, right? It's another idea that we can play around with that works as another layer of creativity. Now you could think about moving on every 1 and every 4 of the 8 count. You could just start with that. Not allowing yourself to move on any other count. So that would look like this: 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Maybe it's highlighting or accenting your movement on the count versus like just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You could try to hold every other count. Move on 1, 3, 5, and 7, and hold 2, 4, 6, and 8. So that could look like this. It'd be 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You could play around with it however you want, but the idea is to just sort of shift the intention behind your freestyle as opposed to not thinking about what counts you're actually utilizing. Try to become more intentional about what parts of the music or what timing you're actually utilizing within your movement. So thinking about that, isolating specific counts for your movement is a great way to sort of become more mindful of the timing of the music and of how you're utilizing that rhythm. So that is the third little prompt that we're going to be utilizing for this section. And then the fourth and final one is to, kind of the same as with the music, this one applies more to our movement, to isolate body parts and movement concepts within the actual moves that we're doing. So as opposed to thinking about utilizing everything all at the same time, we could decide to isolate 2 specific parts of our body. Maybe that's my left hand and my right leg. I'm only going to move with these parts of my body for this whole round, or for 2 8 counts. And then I'm going to utilize my head and my left foot. Maybe those parts of the body work in conjunction with each other. The idea here is to isolate different parts of the body so that you have to think more critically about the way that you are exploring your movement. You can't just hide behind a big sort of general motion with your body. You have to become more isolated in your exploration. When you isolate 1 or 2 parts of your body, it kind of takes you out of the flow that you're used to, and you have to find new ways to sort of explore with a more isolated range, if that makes sense. You can't just default to your normal movement patterns. You have to apply your creativity in new ways, if that makes sense. So, kind of thinking about this idea of only utilizing specific parts of the body, whether that's just the shoulders, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or just the feet, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7, and 8, and 1, or the hips and the shoulders, or just your hands. Really, it's more up to you how you isolate, but the idea remains the same. Trying to utilize this concept of isolating to develop more creativity. When you sort of limit yourself, the options that you have available, it sort of helps to broaden your ability to manipulate and change your movement, if that makes sense. So those are our 4 prompts for this third little section, thinking about changing the focus of our round every blank amount of time. So meaning changing the idea or the movement concept that we're playing around with after every 2/8 counts, every 4/8 counts, every 1/8 count. Sort of thinking about shifting our intention or our focus for our round after a specified amount of time. And then from there, we moved into isolating the different components of the music, meaning isolating parts like the beat, or isolating the melody, or even utilizing the vocals. Thinking about all the different components of the music that we can highlight and really becoming intentional about how we listen to the music, right? Our movement should be guided by the music. We shouldn't be trying to beat the music to the punch. The music should be coming to us and we should be responding to it. And so learning how to listen to the music and to be patient and to be authentic and to respond to what the music is telling us versus us trying to dictate what needs to happen is a very useful skill, and it's going to result in our movement being more just relaxed and more solid and in more alignment with the music that we're dancing to. And then the third idea was to only dance or to move on specific counts. So meaning maybe you isolate or pick 1 or 2 counts, maybe 3, that you allow yourself to move on. If I were to pick 1, 5, and 7, then I would only allow myself to move on counts 1, 5, and 7. So that could look like this: 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You know what I mean. Just sort of isolating those movements or isolating those counts so that you have a bit more of a constriction on your exploration, which forces you to be more creative. And then the fourth and final idea for this third section is this idea of isolating body parts. So sort of the same idea, kind of limiting what we allow ourselves to utilize or to play around with in order to force ourselves to become more creative with utilizing specific parts of the body. Like if I were able to utilize my whole body the whole time, then I could just kind of get lost in this sort of general mush of movement. Like it's not necessarily bad, but if I'm not purposefully choosing to move in that way, then it's sort of just me becoming stagnant. I'm not necessarily progressing into my creativity. I'm not becoming more refined in my movement. I'm just sort of doing the same things over and over again and not really making an informed choice that aligns with the music, if that makes sense. So thinking about isolating different parts of the body in order to cultivate more creativity. With all that being said, with those 4 prompts in mind, let's take some time to explore with our freestyle and to just apply those ideas. So just working with that base that we established at the beginning, our basic freestyle movements, and then thinking about applying or utilizing those 4 prompts. Really diving into our idea of our timing and our musicality for this third section. Let's just go ahead and take some time to explore that. final section of this concept, we're going to be talking about these two ideas of our energy and our effort. And really the idea that we're trying to develop with these two ideas is we're trying to cultivate more control over our movements while we're dancing. And so these next couple of prompts are really going to be centered around our energy, the energy that we're putting into our movement, and our effort. And not just like the actual energy and the actual effort that we're putting into our movements, but also the perceived energy and the perceived effort that we're putting into our movements. And so what I mean by that is that you can actually do something with a specific amount of effort, and then you can make it look like you're doing something with a specific amount of effort. If I was actually lifting a bag that was 50 pounds, it would take a lot of effort. There would be no getting around that. It would actually be a lot of effort. But I can also create the illusion that I am lifting a 50-pound bag by simply changing my perceived exertion of effort with my movement, if that makes sense. Sort of creating the illusion that I am lifting something super heavy by just playing around with the way that I am utilizing my body, if that makes sense. So some of the ideas that we're going to be breaking down, you can think about this idea of perceived effort versus actual effort as well. So to get started, I want to sort of create this analogy of our energy and our effort operating in the same way that a roller coaster does while we dance. So even if we're doing something super impressive, if we are operating at the same level and the same energy the whole time that we're dancing, inevitably that's going to get flat. And it's sort of the same as if you were on a roller coaster, if the track, even if it was 10,000 feet in the air, only ever went straight. If it never dipped or made a circle or did a loop, if it stayed up here at the top, even if you're 10,000 feet above the floor, that's still flat. And so simply moving big isn't enough to make your movement interesting or dynamic. Moving big in specific moments where you intentionally choose to can help to add to the dynamic of your dance, but simply staying at one level the entire time, even if it's a high level, is going to get flat. Same thing, if you just stay down low and you never really explore adding in any more energy or more like abrasive dynamics, it's just going to be flat. And so we want to think about this idea of our energy and our effort operating in the same way that a good roller coaster does. It has dips and it rises up. It does spins and it twists and it goes around in circles. There should be highs, lows, dips, alley-oops, and changes and circles and all these different adjustments to our round throughout the course of our freestyle in the same way that there are rises and dips and flips and circles on a roller coaster. Thinking about being intentional about the effort that we are choosing to exert, or thinking about how the energy or the effort that we are putting into our movement affects the way it is perceived. Thinking about how shifting between two different levels of energy or effort output can change the effect or the look of our movement, if that makes sense. So that's the first sort of prompt. We want to think about our energy and our effort working in the same way that a roller coaster does. There's dips and there's valleys and there's shifts. There's dynamic shifts in our effort and in our energy. One prompt that we can think about to help us dive into this idea, and this kind of goes back to this idea of our control, of not always having to dance at a certain level for it to be impressive, is to think about this idea of kind of pulling our energy back a little bit. Dancing with a little bit less energy and a little bit less effort, maybe a little bit less range than we normally would. Maybe dancing at about 30%. And instead of focusing on doing the movement big or doing it at a certain level, focusing on really trying to explore and develop more style with our round. Trying to develop more informed and specific choices about the way that we do something versus just doing things to like complete a checklist. Think about the way that you're doing something. You can bounce, but there are so many different ways that you can bounce. And the way that you shift and hold and carry your body and just what you bring to your bounce, that's your style. And so thinking more so about prioritizing your style versus your energy and your effort. Along with that, thinking about prioritizing the musicality. So sort of thinking about taking some time to strip back the effort a little bit in order to allow yourself to devote more attention to different aspects of your movement, like your style or your musicality, becoming more isolated and more deliberate with how you are listening to the music, not just passively letting the music play and generally moving to the motion or the rhythm of the music, actively listening to it, trying to understand the beats and the different patterns within the music so that you can align your movement with what's going on in the music more accurately. You're sort of stripping back that layer of effort in order to sort of change the way that you explore your movement, if that makes sense. So that's one little prompt to think about when we're talking about this idea of our energy and our effort. And then the third and final idea for this little section is to think about switching from high energy to low energy and just that spectrum that exists of ramping up our energy and utilizing a little bit less. It's kind of similar to the last one, but thinking about finding specific and deliberate shifts between the energy and the level of effort that you're utilizing while you dance. Not just shifting it for no reason, but thinking about what each movement or each moment within your freestyle might be calling for. You don't have to do everything exactly the same. And learning how to understand what each moment or each motion calls for is a big part of the skill of freestyle. So thinking about being deliberate about the amount of energy that you're putting into something in order to more accurately reflect what's going on in the music and to be more deliberate with what you are doing with your freestyle is one of the most valuable things that you can do as a dancer when it comes to freestyle. I think that a big idea that we're really trying to combat with all of these prompts is just this sort of blind, aimless exploration of not really having a direction or a point of reference to start with and not really listening to the music while we're freestyling, like just this sort of like grasping at straws feeling that I think we can all feel sometimes when we freestyle because we're just trying to do the next thing, as opposed to starting your round like that and opposed to that being your like sort of intention as you're dancing, or as opposed to that being your sort of starting point, we're instead trying to sort of strip back the layers a little bit and work from the ground up. We're trying to utilize the basic building blocks of hip-hop dance as sort of a base, and then from there, think about all the different ways that we can play around with or utilize those ideas to cultivate more style and more intentionality within our freestyle, if that makes sense. So really trying to think about and dive into this idea of our energy and our effort for this final section. Being deliberate with the energy and the effort that you are putting into each moment and not just thinking everything is the same and applying like the same amount of effort to every step. Thinking about how changing your energy and your effort changes the look of a move. Like I could do a kickball change with low energy and like low perceived effort, or I could do it with big energy, boom, 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 boom. It's not necessarily that one execution is more correct than the other. It's more so just understanding that your different execution, utilizing less energy or more energy, is going to change the effect that the movement has when people watch it. And being able to develop that control and that understanding of what putting a certain amount of effort into a move is going to make it look like is a very useful and helpful skill that we develop as dancers. So that is our fourth and final section, and our final sort of prompt for this concept that we've been breaking down. I hope that I explained it clear and that you were able to sort of follow what we're talking about. This is a little bit of a new format of video, and I hope that you guys enjoy it. I would love to hear your thoughts on this sort of new style, this new format of video. My intention is that I want this to feel a little bit more like you guys are actually in class with me. I want you to feel like you are just pacing yourself with me, as opposed to there being so many cuts within the video. I would rather you feel like you are actually here in the room with me and that you are just taking class with me. So like we said at the beginning, the main objective for this concept is to look at your movement and all of the things that you already understand, all of the concepts and the ideas that you normally play around with while you freestyle, in a little bit of a different way. I think that sometimes a big part of why we might feel stuck or why we may feel uninspired within our freestyle is because we're always looking for a new idea. We're always looking for a new step. We're always looking for some new thing that's going to unlock our creativity. When in reality, it's our attention to the things that we already know and the things that we're familiar with, and it's our attention to the basics that actually cultivate and improve our creativity. If we constantly have to have a new piece of information to be creative, then our creativity will only be dictated by having a new piece of information, if that makes sense. Versus if we can develop the ability to look at everything that we have available to us, even if it's just 5 specific ideas, even if you just understand basic hip-hop foundation and you have like a couple other concepts that you like to play around with. It's more valuable as a dancer to understand those 5 things really well than to have 10,000 concepts that you don't really know how to use at all at your disposal. And so we're really trying to dive into this idea of our control and our understanding of our own movement. And so as we wrap up this video, I want you guys to just progress with this idea with the intention of understanding your own movement better, trying to dive deeper into the concepts that you already know and that you utilize and that you're familiar with. Think about diving deeper into those concepts versus feeling like you always have to learn a new concept, if that makes sense. And with all that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the explanation. Let's go ahead and give this final section a shot with some music, and then we'll wrap up this video. And that is going to do it for our breakdown of this simple freestyle concept. A little bit of a different format for this video, you guys. I think that you could tell that maybe this is a little bit different for me, but I am really excited about trying out this new sort of organic style of video. I've been feeling like recently with my videos, I want them to have a little bit more of that organic feel, like you are in class with me. I want to provide some videos for you guys that sort of give you the experience that my students have when they're in class with me. And with that, there's going to be some hiccups and some unlearning that I have to do, because for the past couple of years I've been recording videos and just chopping them up. So thank you for your patience with me in exploring this new idea. But I would really love to know your thoughts on it and to know whether or not it is more or less helpful for you guys. What you like, what you didn't like, if it is helpful or if it's more distracting. Please let me know. You guys are my main group over here on Patreon, and I'm super grateful for all of you, so your opinion is very valuable to me. We're probably gonna try to release a couple more videos like this over the next couple of weeks, just to kind of really experiment with the format. And yeah, I would love to know your guys' thoughts throughout all of it. With all that being said, I just want to thank you guys for watching this video, and I want to thank you for the extra step that you've taken in supporting me by coming over here to Patreon to check out some of the more exclusive stuff that I'm putting out. It really means a lot, and I cannot thank you enough for checking out what I got going on over here. Like I said, feel free to reach out to me in the comments about your thoughts or any videos that you would like to see in the future. Check out The Shed on Instagram or TikTok. You can also DM me over there, and you also have the freedom to DM me here on Patreon. All right, y'all, that's it for this one. I'm gonna see you guys in the next video. Peace out.